All right, we're here today with Mr. Jim Clemons. He was in the 15th Air Force during World War II, the 484th Bomb Group, 827th Bomb Squadron, where he was a tech sergeant and flight engineer on B-24s. So I'll start the interview by asking you, where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Well, when I heard about Pearl Harbor, I had just graduated from Aero Industries Technical Institute, which at that time, those of us that are old enough to remember, aircraft was everything in the coming deal. And we arrived, I and a friend from Iowa arrived at San Francisco on Saturday night and prowled around town for a while and then went to bed and woke up the next morning on Sunday with the newsboys on the street calling about Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And the windows were open because there was no air conditioning then, no need of it in San Francisco anyway. So we toured San Francisco all day Sunday and made arrangements to go out to Treasure Island to interview with Pan American, as we had an interview set up for Pan American that Monday morning. We walked in and guy comes out, takes us inside, looks at our credentials, and he said, "Fellas, you're more than qualified to do work we want to do." And he says, "We've got too many people in the Pacific that we don't know what happened to them and what's going to happen." So we packed our bags and caught a bus for Iowa. Me, I made another trip by train over to Baltimore, Maryland, where a guy I'd gone to school with said, "If you get up that way, come on out, I'll get you a job at Martin Aircraft." I got to Baltimore, and they tell me, "Get on a train, go back home and wait a little while, and we'll call you because we're building a new plant at Omaha." Said it ought to be online in a couple of months. Well, it was almost 6 months. I went to work there, and in the meantime, I had applied for work at Sacramento Army Air Depot. And work at the Martin Air Plant in Omaha was a kind of do whatever you can to stay busy. And they made me an inspector and engine assembly, and there wasn't a whole lot to do. And when this deal came through, I thought, well, here's a chance to get back into aircraft work. And I went to Sacramento, and they were doing a lot of upkeep work on B-24s, P-38s, and other planes that were used in training at that time. Some of them were war-weary, some of them were not. But I left there when I got my induction notice from Iowa. My crew chief said to me, "Well, let's go up and see the head man up here," happened to be a 2-star general. The old boy gave me said, "Where do you want to stay in the Air Force?" And I said, "I'd sure like to." He said, "Well, what's the closest airfield near your home?" I thought a minute and I said, "I think it's Chinook Field, Illinois." He did a little writing, he talked to somebody and said, "Fix this man up." And I ended up going into the induction center in Des Moines, Iowa with that piece of paper in my hand. And when we got through with part of our induction physicals and everything else, and then a little short interview, I handed this piece of paper to a man. He says, "Oh, wait a minute." He left the room, came back, he said, "Come with me." Went in there. He said, "Well, looks like you're going to Chinook Field. That guy outranks anybody around here." So I got on a train after 2 weeks waiting for a pair of shoes, my size. I ended up at Chinook Field, got off that daggone train, and the MPs didn't even need to ask. They just said, "Soldier, where are you going?" Because I had an induction uniform on, hung like a gunny sack, and I didn't know salute for nothing. And I handed him the paper, and he says, "Well, let's go to headquarters." I went up to headquarters. I handed it to the OD up there at headquarters. He says, "Ooh, you just wait right here." Came back, he said, "Come with me." And I walked into this room, and there's a little old one-star general sitting behind the desk. I snapped up at attention like a greenhorn and just out of the cornfield and threw a salute at him, and he kind of grinned. And he said, "Mr. Clemons," he says, "I don't know what I'm going to do with you here, but this man outranks me, so you are mine." He said, "You're going out to the Permanent Party Air Base Squadron." And I lived in a castle. I lived in a castle out there. It was a magnificent building at the time. A huge bay there with all different guys in it. And I got itchy feet again and applied for Aviation Cadets. Finally made it through to that, shipped out to Jefferson Barracks, Missouri. And I lasted the rest of the winter before I washed out. My right hand and my left hand was supposed to go the opposite directions, and mine didn't want to cooperate. So they shipped me off to gunnery school, and I went to Las Vegas. Flew around in B-17s, shooting at targets towed by AT-6s, trying to cut the cable, so if we cut the cable, everybody got a perfect score. We finished with that. While I was there in Las Vegas, they took us out in a pickup truck with a circle to stand in, and you had a loader. You give you a shotgun, 12-gauge shotgun. You drive around this track shooting skeet. I went around the track and I missed the first one, and I said, "Huh. It's just like shooting rabbits and pheasants out of the back of the pickup back home." And I started cleaning house. Come find out, I won a steak dinner and a night on the town in Las Vegas. Well, during this time we were learning about the 50 caliber machine gun, and one of the requirements was that you learn to completely disassemble and reassemble every part on there blindfolded. And the fastest man, they said, gets to go to Vegas. Fastest two men get to go to Vegas. I won that one. From there I went to Tucson, was assigned to this crew in the picture, and for 8 weeks we did.
Just for the record, there's the crew he's assigned to, and this is Jim right here.
For 8 weeks we would have classes in the morning, we go fly for 5 or 6 hours, come back, classes then, and classes at night. And that was our day, and they alternated when our flying time was. Sometimes we'd fly twice a day, once early in the morning and once late in the evening. And then we'd have classes in between them. And 8 weeks of that, and an occasional Saturday night on the town at the Santa Rita Hotel in Las Vegas, or Tucson, Arizona. And the last time I was out there, the Santa Rita Hotel was still going strong. But after that, we got a week off, and I guess you could say that while we were there, we practice bombed on every major facility around there, Hoover Dam and all the other dams up and down the rivers out there, plus a lot of desert with piles of rocks on them that the bombardiers could use for targets. And we'd go down on the deck once in a while and try out our machine guns. that after we finished there Tucson, we got a week off, went home to see the families, and then met back at Topeka, Kansas, and were introduced to our brand spanking new airplane. And after about a week, checking everything out on that, they loaded us up with extra tanks in the bomb bay. In the back bomb bay, they put in racks, and they filled it with equipment, rations, everything else, anything else you could imagine. And in the back of the airplane, up on top of the wing, there was a compartment up there above the wing that you got to by going through the bomb bay and climbing up there. There was room for more storage, and they had that plane packed just about as full as you could get it with everything that they wanted us to take over there. Mm-hmm. And we left, and after we had gotten out of the flight pattern at Topeka, the pilots opened the orders, and it said, well, guys, it says on here we're going to Manchester, New Hampshire. We spent the night there. The next morning he announced that we were going to Gander, Newfoundland. And we went to Gander, Newfoundland. We were supposed to leave as soon as the weather cleared, and about 6 days later the weather finally cleared. We went from there, we went to, flew the Azores at night. We flew from Newfoundland to the Azores at night. We were all kidding our navigator. Said, you're going to earn your cookies this time, Vern. Vern Hood, the navigator. Says, if we have to swim, we're going to all drown you first. And he hit a dead center. And I'd lay back and go to sleep, and the propellers would get out of sync, and they'd start this yum, 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 and I'd wake up and come up, and I'd say to the pilot, hey, you're out of sync, turn it down so I can sleep. Well, we landed there, and I'm pretty sure we spent that day there. It doesn't sound right, but I think we did spend the whole day there and left the next day for Marrakesh, North Africa, Morocco. And we landed there in good time and had plenty of time to rest and everything. And they were going to do a 50-hour inspection on our plane, and I wanted to stay with it. And they asked the crew chief on the ground, he said, pilot had said, does my flight engineer need to stay, wants to stay with you? He says, is there any need? And he says, no, he says, we do this all the time. So I left. And I always, to this day, think, maybe if I had stayed, I might have been on that platform with a screwdriver and found that loose hose clamp that dang near got us killed the next morning when we took off. We took off and we got into a bunch of clouds, and we had the Atlas Mountains in our way, and we had to climb up over them. I think they're about 13,000 feet. And we were in a cloud bank under us. And somebody in the back of the airplane hollered out, hey, we got a fire on number 3, and I'm sitting behind behind the pilot on the long bench there, just kind of relaxed. I just peeked out the radio operator's window, and I had a blowtorch out there. I just reached over my shoulder and turned the fuel off for number 3, and the pilot says, let's feather number 3. And I said, hold on, buddy. I said, let's don't feather it. Nobody went on my crew went by Sergeant or Sergeant Clemons or Sergeant Thompson or anybody like that. It was first name basis from there on, and nobody. Other crews, you'd see them go out and line up in the morning to get on their airplane. The pilot would line them all up, and they'd all do a shore inspection and everything else. we just got along like we lived together.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, when that fire was on, pilot rang the bailout bell. 2 bells. One, and then the second when you jump, if he has time to punch it. And I got him shut off for that. I said, don't feather the engine. I said, let's try burning it out. And about the time I got the words out of my mouth, they said it's done. And so we went back to Marrakech. Spent the night, went back out to the field the next morning. And they had pulled the plate off the bottom of the wing behind number 3. And in there was the rubber bladder for the fuel. And it had gotten so hot that the bladder had stuck to the bottom plate. I asked the sergeant and crew chief how long we had before we'd have gone to heaven or hell. He said, well, I hope you're looking for heaven, but he said, that's not the point. He said, you had very little time left. Mm-hmm. Just look at that bladder. It had stuck to the plate, it had separated. And from there on, we hitchhiked all the way across North Africa. Take a hop one day, getting into Algiers, and then another place to Tunis, Tunisia. Finally got a ride to Sicily.
Wow.
Ate lunch in Sicily, and it was so darn hot there. We were all, this is in August. Mm-hmm. It's just so darn hot, and nobody stood in line with a hat on or anything, and 2 of us were getting bleary-eyed from the heat, and I ended up holding the lunch kit over my head till we got food in it. When we finally ended up getting on, clear on up to, caught a ride out of there and went off. I think my notes in there said that we made 2 stops from Sicily to Naples to Gioia and then to Foggia and then down to our base at Cerindola. And we just got there and they drove in with a whole Jeep load of blankets and everything and dumped them off on the ground in front of it and said, here's your tent for a while, see how long you like it. I hope you stay a while. Because at that time, according to my notes that I started keeping after we got to Gander, the average life of the crew was about 10 missions. Mm-hmm. And some of them didn't make it that far.
So what month and year was this when you finally arrived in Cerindola?
August.
August of 44?
44.
44, okay.
And Toretta Field on September the 9th. And unloaded a whole Jeep load of blankets in front of the tent for us. Chow's not bad. Had to sleep on the floor that night. Shorty had trouble with the mice, so he pulled out his .45 and waylaid a couple of them. This tent will take a lot of work fixing before it's livable again. You have to go to group headquarters at Foggia the next day. We went to Gioia instead and waited for the rest of the crew, gunners, to catch up with us. The 4 officers and myself came together. Wilcox left at Marrakech with a B-17 crew. And Gioia is not too much to look at either. It's on the Adriatic coast of Italy. September the 6th. Yeah, we went out and got a little loopy that night on fresh Italian wine. not good for the system. On the 7th, rest of the gunners arrived, and we've been moving out to our base, and so the 20th, then there's a gap from the 7th until the 20th of September.
Okay.
And that comes out by without reading. So we had, after we got all of our crew together, we had to go through orientation at our base with our commanders. And while we were, Colonel was checking out the pilot and co-pilot, he asked the he happened to ask the pilot, and I was standing. I always stood between the pilot and co-pilot. That was my space. I didn't have anything to sit on. I just stood there. I asked the pilot. He says, "Where's your crew chief, engineer?" Pilot said, "Woody," says, "he's standing right beside you." Turned around and looked at me, and he says, "Corporal, when did you get busted?" I said, "Sir, I've never been busted." He said, "Huh? You never been busted?" I said, "No." "How come you only got corporal stripes?" "Well," I said, "Sir, it's kind of like this. I never went to an Army tech school. I said, I had a year of aircraft maintenance and overhaul in a civilian school. I worked on B-17s at Sacramento Army Air Depot." And I said, "What you see is what you got." I said, I got the job back at Tucson." "Well," he said, "you must be, well, you sure as hell go to get stripes when I get down on the ground." And he said, "We'll get you in." He says, "I can't do it all at once." He said, "I get you one this month, staff next month, tech the third month." I said, "That's all right with me." And after all of that training with those guys, we finally made a run. And I think we made one bomb run up around Bologna, Italy, in the northern Italy before the deal was, the thing came up about French. We were called upon to go tactical. So many airplanes out of our squadron and group. We're going to go tactical. In other words, we were going to take out the belly turret, take out the waist guns. We left the top turret and nose tail guns in. Put boards over the hole for the belly turret, the ball turret. In the bomb bay, they put two 600-gallon tanks. I think they were 600-gallon tanks. One on each side in the front bomb bay and in the back bomb bay, the way they had us coming over. They've put racks in there. And we hauled supplies, oil and ammunition and things like that in this back bomb bay, and had more of it in the back end. And we filled the back of the airplane full of 50-gallon barrels and an auxiliary fuel pump with a little outboard or gas engine on it. And we flew from our base to Marseilles, outside of Marseilles, to a little town called I know it by heart, but I can't think of it. The first run we made, we went all the way to Lyon, France, which is quite a ways up the Rhone River. The reason we were doing this was because they invaded southern France in that spring, the spring of '44, and Patton with his outfit, and the invasion started clobbering the Germans, and the Germans were retreating, and when they'd get through with a bridge or anything they could use, they'd damage it or blow up the bridges. So that's why I guess we took our first load to Marseilles to get it up there where Patton could have some gas for some tanks that had gotten up there. And we unloaded up there, and then we flew all the way back. Well, the best part of it is, they give you a slide rule when they give you a B-24. You're supposed to be able to calibrate how much fuel you're going to need to fly so many miles. And at least one airplane didn't make it and got dropped in the drink on the way home. And we made 2 runs. Istres, France, was where the field was at, Istres. And the second run we went to Istres, and after that we used Istres as a base. We were bunked in an apartment house that the Germans had used for officers' quarters. And we'd get up and load every morning and head out. And if it wasn't too foggy, we could follow the Rhone River. But that got a little bit hairy because it got pretty darn foggy on us, and we had everybody on the airplane watching out for bridges because we were frightened out on the deck. Bridges, power lines, anything else that was sticking up. And we flew the time that I was there. We flew to Lyon, Dijon, I don't know how they're supposed to pronounce them, and another small airfield. We made 2 runs to hit up beyond Dijon, D-O-L-E, Dole or whatever it happened to be. And we
So were these missions being counted towards your total missions you needed to fly?
yes, they gave us credit for them.
So they were mostly just supply missions
Yeah,
to supply the troops.
They were supply missions. 25th, 26th, 29th, Istres to Dole, September 30th to Dijon, October the 8th. October the 8th, 1944. I don't know if it was the 7th or 8th. I don't have that recorded in there. But the pilot, Woodrow Wilson, and the radio operator went out and they got a little bit loopy on French wine. And whether they rented it, bought it, or stole it from a Frenchman, they got on a Frenchman's motorcycle. And the pilot wanted to drive it, and he had never been accustomed to driving a motorcycle, while Wilcox, the radio man, had some time on it. Well, sadly enough, they wrapped it around a tree, and Wilcox got beat up pretty bad, but the pilot tried to take a bite out of the tree. And he lasted until, I think he lasted about 2 days. And he died October the 7th. 3 days of unconsciousness. And we went back to the base with somebody else riding first pilot. We cut our time a couple of days short up there because they quit that right after we left. And we flew with, from there on out, we started flying missions shortly after that. And on the 12th, 5 days after we got back to our base, we started flying missions with a new pilot practically every mission. And that went along pretty well. They always gave us a decent pilot. First pilots you never worried about. The ones that were the bad ones, ones you didn't worry. You worried about were the, if you didn't have a co-pilot, you wondered who was going to be sitting in another chair. And we got some doozies. And we went along that way with first one pilot and then another. And Snyder, Bill Snyder, our co-pilot, then lasted until sometime in December, just before Christmas. And no, let's see. We finally got our regular pilot assigned to us. I don't know what the date was, but I'm probably be a month. And they came up with a guy that needed so many more missions to complete his work, so they assigned him to us. He was a big 6-foot tall kid, about 19 years old, about the same age as a year younger than I was. And this kid he was fantastic with that airplane. He'd sit there and horse that thing around with one hand. Bill, he'd take two hands. And when I sat in on the seat and got to fly it, it took two hands to move B-24 around. And C.K. Williams was his name. And he finished his missions just before Christmas. And do you know, when he walked off and said, "Bye boys, I'm going home," I don't think any of us got a home address for the guy. And several years later, not too many years back from now, I read about him as being a member of the 484th Bomb Group Association. I called him up and confirmed who he was, and we sat there on that telephone and we laughed and we cried and we talked for an hour and a half. My wife said, "How you going to pay that phone bill?" I said, "The heck with the phone bill."
Yeah. Wow.
We went on and finished our missions with Bill being the pilot, and then that's when it got hairy, because we were getting guys that had bad runs, shot down, flak happy. In other words, on the verge of mental problem when they get over the target or when an emergency arises. They're still trying to keep them on flying status. And I probably shouldn't say this on the tape, but two instances I know of. One was we took off to get into formation and we started form up a group from our base, and we had to go through cloud cover. And Bill, the pilot, said, "I'm going on instruments now." And he told the co-pilot, he said, "I want you to call the airspeed." I says, "I want you, Clem, to watch ahead and see where we're at," because he says, "I am not taking my eyes off those instruments." And if you've ever flown and fly in clouds, it doesn't take long. When you can't see out, you don't know whether you're right side up or upside down. And this one guy, we had one airplane that came within sight and we got rid of him. Came in off the side instead of us coming into him from the rear. And we managed to get away from him. And this guy kind of blew his fuse and he started hollering, let me have it, I'll get us out of here, get us out of here. And I told him, I said, Lieutenant, shut the hell up. And he kept it up. And behind the co-pilot's seat on the bulkhead, there was an electrical crash axe for the radios, in case you had to cut the power cables, your insulated handle and so forth. I reached around and I got that around and I stuck that up there in his face and I said, Lieutenant, you will call the airspeed or I will be in that seat and you will be back here on the floor. He got big-eyed and looked at me and I said, I mean it. We finally got out of that scrape, got into some clear air, but we were in the clouds for too damn long. And I figured I was going to catch hell, and I got threatened when we got on the ground, but I never heard anything of that. And the other guy was over the target. He was wanting to get out of there. He'd been there too often. And some can take it, some couldn't. But when we went to those hot targets like Vienna and Regensburg, Moose Beer Bomb, and Munich, we got into it in Munich one time with another scrappy co-pilot. And it didn't take long to shut him up because the pilot says, shut up or I'll put my engineer in there. And that was a catastrophe, though, that raid on Munich. It was supposed to be a coordinated, maximum effort bomb mission to Munich, Germany, with 15th Air Force and 8th Air Force. And I don't know how many bombers they had in the air. And then it socked in on us. The weather socked in. And we had collisions that day that should never have happened between airplanes. And one other time, one hairy time we took off. It was in, I think, late February. And you didn't ever do any flying. There's such a thing as dead air. You can't get anything out of your airplane. It doesn't want to fly. It's one of those hot, muggy days. And we took off. We had a maximum load bombs. We took off from our runway and we poured on all the power we had, usual power. And Bill said, Jim, give me some more manifold pressure. So I souped it up and he said, call off the point of no return. You either shut down now or you're going to bust up. I watched that point of no return and I said, it's coming up pretty fast. He started horsing the stick. The old bird wouldn't lift. He said, give me some more boost on the manifold pressure. And I cranked in everything he had. He started horsing it around, finally got it to come up, bump. It wouldn't stay up. Nothing between us but a barbed wire fence and a hell of a pile of rocks. And he finally pulled it off the ground and took the landing gear out from under it, and we either flew or didn't. We just couldn't get any airspeed up to where we could gain any altitude, and I swore to God that day that was going to be it. And so did it. Bill and the rest of the officers on the deck.
Did any other planes that day have trouble taking off? at that time?
Yeah, some of them did, yeah. And those old birds were getting kind of war weary, and if you got one of them, you couldn't tell it from when the engines ran when you normally, but you give them a head. It just was the weather that morning. Clear weather, hot, muggy. Couldn't get any lift out of the airplane. And I thought we had bought the farm because we stayed right down on the darn deck. We managed to clear that barbed wire fence. And this pilot was sitting there and he was fighting that thing, and all at once I saw him and I said, "Bill, there's a gully down there." He said, "Yeah, I know." He said, "I'm going to try something." He tipped her over just a little, and I looked out that left window there, and I swear to God, to this day, I could count the blades of grass going by the tip of that wing. And he pulled it into that gully and headed her downhill because we were up on a plateau. He got a little airspeed. Hell, everything changed.
Wow.
But he turned around, Bill turned around and looked at me. He says, "Phew." I just reached over and patted him on the back and I said, "That's a good job, Bill. Best job. We're alive." I was all set to salvo the bombs to lighten our load. And I thought, hell, we're so close to the ground. If one of those safety wires comes out and that prop spins far enough, we'll go up anyway. Left it alone. We're here to talk about it. Bill ended up, when he finished the war and got to Santa Ana, California, and he and I and the navigator had made a pact on the boat coming back. If we can't do anything else, let's see if we can go to ATC. Clem for the crew chief, I'll navigate and help fly, and we'll fly supplies, DC-3s or something like that. I went up to see Bill to see if I wanted to take my discharge, and they said, "Bill's in the hospital." He looked at me from the bed and he said, "Clem, I'm done flying. They won't let me off the ground again." He'd had too much.
Wow.
But he turned out to be a hell of a pilot. Just like that kid that finished up, and Bill didn't have the confidence that the other kid did. We went, this Williams, C.K. Williams, the pilot that took over after Woody was killed, we had to take a bunch of guys to Naples to go to rest camp. So we loaded up a couple of the ground crew and took off with these guys going to rest camp. Fly over there to Naples, and we go into town, and we fart around for too long. We get back out to the field, and it's sitting down in a kind of a bowl. A few hills around us. And the tower tells my pilot, he said, "You can't take off," he says, "we're socked in." CK called the tower back and he said, "Do you have any searchlights on the field, the perimeter of this field?" He said, "Yeah." "How many you got?" I said, "We got 5 or 6. He said, "I want you to pick a spot over the center of the field. Shine all of those spotlights on that one spot in the center of the field and hold it there." "What are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to take off." We got that thing off the ground. We were empty. He pulled her up and he started to climb in a tight circle. We went right around that spot and them clouds till we came out on top. We got back to our base at Cerindola, and the tower says, "You know, you better go where you came from because we got a 45-mile-an-hour crosswind here right now." He said, "All right, we're coming in." "You what?" "We're coming in." He said, "I ain't going back." get in down there and take a look at the field. You can see it way down there. He dropped his altitude down 1,500, 2,000, something like that. Starts heading down for the runway. Boy, that wind is pushing, pushing, pushing. All at once he goes. Dropped the left wing, kicked the right rudder. We went down toward the runway on a side slip. They said that they had everything on the runway, all the emergency crews running by the time we hit the ground. He got right down next to the ground, and just before we hit, he kicked it out, straightened her up, hit the runway. Oh, wow. That landing gear, oh! And they told us when we got back from that run where we couldn't get any lift, they said that when we went out of sight from the tower, everything, all of the emergency equipment they could call was on the way. And he said, you guys didn't crash, you came up. And how the hell did you get there?
Wow. Bill
got DFC out of it. And they got me a DFC for, I think a good bit of it come from that fire we had. Mm-hmm. And then the fact that our bomb runs didn't make a difference if it was a milk run or full of flak. Superchargers on those things ran on amplifiers that controlled the gate so that the manifold pressure would stay in one place, or you could move it and lessen it, and invariably one of those amplifiers would go out. Well, when you get 3 engines, when the amplifier's out on all 3 of them, you got 1 spare. And where does the crew chair flight engineer sit? He sits on the bulkhead. Right down there in this little old box over here. Just sitting there with a set of headphones and an oxygen mask on, waiting for the pilot to tell him which one needs boost. And you plug it into that one. Take the bad one out and plug the good one in for a minute, get the full pressure back up. And another one's bad, going bad, you pull that one out, put the good one in, then pull it out, put the old one back in. All the time your ass is hanging on over the other side of that bulkhead, and they're making the bomb run. You can sit right there and look out, sight down the bulkhead. When they holler bombs away, you start looking, and when you see an explosion right down to the, wow, right there by the bulkhead.
Were you strapped in?
That's what you dropped. And they say, oh, that can't be. I said, try it sometime, buddy. You're not me, I ain't gonna hang my ass out there.
So then how many missions did you end up flying then?
31. We get credit for 5 for France. And
did you ever encounter enemy fighters?
Encounter? No. Never fired a shot, any of our gunners, at an enemy fighter. We saw them, but by the time we got over there, Germany was hurting real bad. They were putting 18, 19-year-old kids in fighter planes with 2 hours of flying time. And on top of that, the P-51 came online that winter. And the P-51 won the air war for us. The P-51, the P-38, and the P-47. The P-47 was a radial engine, big, heavy, tough, armor plate all over it. But the P-51 had an inline engine, and that sucker had a belly tank on it, and they could go farther and get back home and still do fighting. And I have a hunch that your buddy Tony might have got a story or two out of Jim Carl about that. And I think he flew both P-47s, and when the P-51s got to England, that's mine. And I know he got shot down once. Either shot down or ran out of gas and had to crash. And then got home.
Wow. So what was probably your most harrowing experience?
Probably,
What was probably your most scary or harrowing experience that you had?
I think probably the worst the closest I ever come to thinking I'm going to meet my maker was the morning we took off and couldn't get that old bird to fly and cut down that gully. If that gully hadn't have been there, I think we would have been a grease spot on the Italian hills. But other than that, it was flak is something that you had to. It's fascinating. It's fascinating, and if you went on a target, a bomb run, and your lead bomber with the bomb sight couldn't see the target, and you had to go around and come in again. By that time, the German gunners knew exactly what altitude you were flying at. And that was when it would really get scary. And they may have been losing the war, but they could sure hell put up a lot of lead up there. And the saying goes that how was the flak so thick you could walk on it, and that's about the way you felt.
What were the heaviest defended targets that you recall on your missions?
Vienna, I think, probably qualified as good as anybody for every time. Because the Germans built flak towers around the city. My cousin stayed over there after the war. His name is Jim Clemons, too. He's Jim Clemons II. He lives in Virginia, and he stayed over there. He was there through the end of the war in, what do they call it, S2 or something like that. And then he married a girl from over there, and they've been back several times, and he says that they've kept a lot of the old flak towers. I don't know how tall they built them, but they built these, what they call flak towers. I don't know how many guns they put on them, but I think they put 1 or 2 or 3 guns on each tower. I've got them up above and seemed to give them a little more reach. Not that they needed it, but he said those things are still over there, and they've converted them into tourist attractions and everything else.
That's amazing.
But there were several targets over there that were super bad, and Vienna took the lead as far as I was concerned. Munich was terrible. Munich was bad. We went there twice, twice. I think I've got to go into my desk and get it. Maybe you've read it or not. I don't know if you've read it or not. I also have that story about the B-24 that went down and didn't make it into the island runway and crashed in the ocean. And maybe you'd like to have part of that.
If you have it available, I could read it, sure.
Yeah, I'll when we get through, I'll
Okay.
get it for you. But we had a lot of fun while we were down at Davis Mountain. We'd go to town and go to Santa Rita Hotel and kick up your heels and drink some booze. Go back and still be able to fly the next day. And I went through, I don't know how many darn places. After I washed out at Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, I ended up being sent to Nebraska, and I don't for the life of me know where I ended up. And I was transferred to another place in Nebraska before I was pulled to go to Las Vegas. So there's 2 spots, and they were just go in and do KP or police up to grounds, you know, and colder than hell in the wintertime. And that's, you just didn't give a darn about remembering too much about it.
Well, we've got about 5 minutes left on the tape
Oh.
here. I guess so. You finished up your tour,
Yeah.
and when did you start heading back to the States?
It was, we finished our bombing missions, and I have it written down in that there. Okay, April 5th, I finished up, 1945. The last bomb run for me. And then the pilot and I took up an airplane and slow timed it for a while. Put a change of an engine on, they'd take it up and fly it for an hour or 2 or 3 hours maybe, just to make sure everything's all right. And then they shipped us that were done out to the old World's Fairgrounds in Naples. And we spent roughly 2 weeks there before they had a boat that would bring it home. My tail gunner and my nose gunner were super scavengers. One was a Greek agnost, and the other, I don't know what he was, but he was an architect after civilian life got him. They scrounged around all over Italy, hitchhiking by airplane, truck, jeep, deliver this to that other base, and you can have a ride. After the war was, you know, they shut down. By the time I got to the rest of the fairgrounds in Naples, those guys were out flying or flitting around Germany or Italy seeing the sights. They went to Rome, Florence, and places like that, looking at, this one was an architect, wanted to be an architect, and he wanted to see the buildings. Well, when I left Naples on a boat, that damn tail gunner says, I looked down and saw your boat sailing out of the harbor when I flew over, flying home. He beat us home. The 2 of them beat us home. They were shipping back planes that would make it back home. They were bringing back to take to the Pacific. The old war-weary ones, they weren't too careful about them. But as we were left harbor at Naples, they told us that Germany had capitulated. We still had to travel a zigzag course on the cruise liner, the converted cruise liner, back to the States, and we still had to go on watch. Our watch on the boat was to make sure that nobody else opened the door and let light out, because the submarines might be out there that didn't get the word. And the cruise ship, the ship that brought us home was the Mariposa. And I don't know how many years ago I read an article that the Mariposa was in San Francisco attached to some cruise line out there again. And that's been probably 10, 12 years ago that I read that article. And that damn boat's still going.
No kidding. Wow.
We caught the boat back to Massachusetts, Boston, pulled into harbor up there, and everybody ran over to the side to see the girls, you know, lying on the dock. And the old captain, he got on the bullhorn and he says, "Everybody can get back." The boat started going backwards and away from the dock. He says, "I will not dock this boat until you people learn to stay on one side or the other and divide it up, because I am not going to have this ship capsized at the dock because of a bunch of nuts." And he did. He set her out, and we sat out in the harbor until he got them settled down. And we got in there, got a cup of coffee and a donut from a Red Cross girl, got on a dang train and hauled off. Went through New York City, never saw a damn thing of it.
Wow. So you're glad to be home, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, we were tickled to death. Had 30 days at home and then back to Santa Ana. And the old boy there, we figured our points all the way home. We didn't know how many points they had given us. I went in for my interview with a guy that had a sleeve full of hash marks and everything else. He says, "You want out, Sarge?" And I said, "Hell, I ain't got enough points." He looked at the sheet and he says, "You got more points? You got points to burn that you didn't know about." And that's when I told him, "Hey, wait a minute. I got to find out whether my pilot and my navigator are going to ATC. He says, "You nuts or something?" "All right, you can have till tomorrow." So I got busy. That's when I found out that Bill was in the hospital. And the navigator said, "Bill's in the hospital." And Bill says, "I don't get to fly anymore." He went on to be some kind of an engineer.